Okay, we are live.
Awesome. Okay. So everyone, we're just going to wait around 2 to 3 minutes for everybody else to hop on, and then we'll start roughly around 9:05. That's okay for everybody.
How can you tell if people are coming on or whatever?
Okay. So if you click on the YouTube side, there says 5 people watching right now. So that's 5 people, not including ourselves.
Oh, it says 3 people are watching.
So if you click on the YouTube side, there says 5 people watching right now. So that's 5 people.
I don't have a YouTube thingy.
3 people are watching.
So if you click on the YouTube side, there says 5 people watching right now. So that's 5 people.
I don't have a YouTube thingy.
3 people are watching.
Oh, I am hearing echoing now. I can hear ourselves over and over.
Yeah. I guess if you're not speaking, you need your mic if you're not speaking.
Oh, I am hearing echoing now. I can hear.
Should I mute? I'm gonna mute. Maybe that'll help.
Okay. So if you're not speaking. Okay, so that's a lot better. Okay. So just a couple more minutes, and then we'll get started. All right, so I think we can get started right now. So just a quick little introduction and I guess the purpose of this video. So hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. Basically this is a CPP webinar presented by UVSA Ontario about the Pacific Links Foundation. The purpose of today's call is to inform you all about a pressing matter that is troubling Vietnam and a huge part of the world, and how the Pacific Links Foundation is helping to prevent it and how you can help. So before we start, I'd like to quickly talk about CPP, since you'll hear me toss it around quite often, and CPP is quite known, and you know the term itself is quite used. And so CPP basically is known as the Collective Philanthropy Project. It's a collaborative philanthropic initiative launched yearly by UNAVSA, or the Union of North American Vietnamese Student Associations. What we do is the aim of this is to raise money for a selected charity. In the past, together, VSAs have raised over $100,000 for various charities. And actually, the selected beneficiary today or this year is actually the Pacific Links Foundation. So here with us today is Mimi Vu, who's the Director of Advocacy and Partnerships for Pacific Links, and also Diane Trong, who's the Communications Manager. So both of these people will be telling us about the Pacific Links Foundation, human trafficking, and how we can help. So Mimi and Diane, please do take it away.
Hi, thank you, Alan. Good morning, or I guess good evening to everyone. I'm here in Saigon, so it's morning for me. Thank you again for selecting us as the CPP beneficiary for the school year. We're very excited to work with all the UNAVSAs all across North America. So a bit about the background of human trafficking and how it pertains to Vietnamese people. So Vietnam is one of what we call the top source countries, meaning we have victims coming from Vietnam and get sent out or sold out to other countries, or what we call destination markets. You'll hear me using some kind of like business type terms because that is how we view human trafficking. It is a trade and it is a business. It's an illegal business and an illegal trade. It makes lots of money for people. So in order to think about how we want to stop this from happening, we also have to think about it in the business sense, because that's what it is. So in the region, meaning Asia region, Vietnam is the top source country for trafficking victims. The main destination countries are China, Cambodia, and Malaysia. In addition to that, Vietnam also supplies foreign brides to men in Taiwan and in South Korea. About 80% of the victims in the Asia region are women and girls, and the rest are young men and boys. And the push-pull factors are the reasons why they get sent out from Vietnam, and also why the demand is coming from other countries. It depends on the destination market or the destination country. So for example, in China, because of China's one-child policy, they're missing between 30 to 40 million women since 1979. So that's the same amount of men who don't have a supply of women to get married and have wives and have children. So what they do is they draw from Vietnam. We're their closest neighbor, and we're their most populous neighbor. And we all share in history and kind of common culture, and so they draw from us. For Cambodia, because it's an international sex destination for pedophiles and other men who go on sex tourism, they draw from Vietnam, but the age range tends to be a lot younger, between about, I would say, 8 to 15 years old. Malaysia is also a top destination for foreign brides and prostitutes as well, for Vietnamese. And we're actually #1 for foreign prostitutes in Malaysia. And what's unique about Vietnam, unfortunately, in this case, is that we also have a large trafficking trade to Europe. In the UK, Vietnam is the #1 source country for child trafficking victims and #2 for adults. So you think about how long and the distance between Vietnam all the way to the UK, and it's astounding that Vietnam is #1 for children, #2 for adults. 65% of the victims there are men and boys. So the gender profile is flipped. Most of the men and boys who get sent there and sold there are forced to work as slaves in marijuana farms run by Vietnamese organized crime groups. And girls also are forced to work in marijuana farms, but they're also forced to work in nail salons run by the Vietnamese because we dominate the nail industry everywhere we are. And in the evenings, also forced into prostitution. So as you can see, the issue of human trafficking in Vietnamese people is spread out. It's extremely complicated. There's so many factors that are involved. And so our response has to be multi-pronged as well, and we have to work with many different partners. We can't do this alone, just because it's such a huge problem. So that's why we're super excited to partner with the UNAVSAs, because I think working with you guys means that this hopefully will continue, that, it won't be just a one-off thing, that you won't, work on this and then finish school and then go off and not think about this again. No matter where we are, we're all, Gốc Việt, we all have Vietnamese roots. We're all tied to each other by roots and culture. And so this is something that I think is very important for all Vietnamese people, no matter where you are, to pay attention to and to kind of pitch in and help resolve, if at all possible. So the project that we are working on with, for the CPP project that we're working on with UNAVSA, pertains to our reintegration program. So what we do at Pacific Links is we work with survivors, and we also work with the at-risk population. It's very important to look at what are the root causes or the influencing factors that make someone vulnerable to being trafficked, and address those causes, because if you constantly just focus on only victims, you never strike at the heart of why people are getting trafficked. And because of our work with victims, we know how difficult it is for a victim to overcome his or her trauma. And so it's better to focus on, to develop a lot of programs on prevention. What we're doing is looking at the lack of education as a contributing factor to make makes someone vulnerable to being trafficked, poverty, gender issues. So as I mentioned before, you have the gender split between Europe and Asia. Identity, so are you ethnic minority? Are you a migrant worker? And also law enforcement. So how strong is border control? How well-trained are the police in dealing with traffickers and trafficking victims? So all of our programs, whether it's prevention or reintegration, addresses those issues. With our reintegration program, even though it's working with trafficking survivors, we also look at that as a prevention program, because in Vietnam, % of all traffickers arrested are former victims. And this speaks directly to the lack of survivor support in this country for trafficking victims. For us, we have a reintegration program, and in it, it's split into 2 parts. One is supports law enforcement, border control, who deal with trafficking victims as soon as they encounter them at the border, and also supports the victims as soon as they come to the border. And the other program is Reintegration Home for trafficking survivors. I have to tell you, I do most of the fundraising with support from Diane. In And I can tell you that raising money for the victim support program is probably the hardest thing to do, which is why we're so excited that this CPP and UNAVSA has chosen our reintegration support program for survivors as the CPP project this year. There's a whole host of reasons why, but mostly it's because of the stigma that's attached to supporting trafficking victims. It's difficult work, it's time consuming, it's emotionally taxing, it's expensive, but it's so important to support these young women who have gone through hell and back at such a young age. And to allow them to have a chance to have a life, a real life, even though they've gone through so much trauma, their lives are not over at the age of 16 or 17. So what we want to do is help them recover and also become good contributing members of society and get married and have children and go have a career and support their families and not be re-victimized or at worst case, victimize others. So with the CPP project, what you're doing to raise money for is to support these items. Number one is our RISE, or Returnee Initial Support Essentials program. And this is a program that is implemented right at the border of Vietnam and China and Vietnam and Laos. And what we do is we train border guards on how to properly interview and take in female trafficking survivors as soon as they're brought over by the Chinese or the Laotian police. This is very important because the young woman has been extremely traumatized. And if she's interrogated or feels like she's being interrogated at the border crossing and she's scared, then she will deny that she was a trafficking victim. If that's the case, then she's sent home and without any support services at all. And that means that her risk of becoming re-trafficked is higher because she is alone or she's stigmatized by the community. And so it's very easy for her to get lured into finding another job or getting sent back over to China or back over to Laos or even Cambodia. So what we also do with the border guards is we distribute what we call RISE packages. And each of these packages hold a change of clothing, shoes, soap, shampoo, and information on our reintegration homes. The reason why we do this is twofold. Number one is, especially for the young women who have escaped from brothels, because they're often sold into China to work as prostitutes, they will escape wearing no clothes or only some clothes or no shoes. And oftentimes the Chinese police will bring them back to the border as is, meaning that, and it's a complicated political situation between Vietnam and China at the border. And so what the border guards have told us in Vietnam is that they will often have to take off their own shirts or jackets and give them to the girls. You have to understand that these are isolated mountainous areas, so there's no grocery store or shopping mall for them to go out and buy clothes for the girls. So what we do is we distribute these packages so the border guards can then not only allow the girls to get dressed and shower and just, you know, clean up, but also it's symbolic in that the border guards are giving the girls some measure of dignity back. What it does is creates or breaks down the level of distrust between the girl and the border guard so that hopefully she'll be more likely to speak candidly with the border guard. The more information she provides, the more likely they can pass that information on to the Chinese police and who can then help rescue other Vietnamese girls who are stuck in China. And our second part of the CPP project is our reintegration homes. In Vietnam, there are only 3 long-term reintegration homes for female trafficking survivors, and Pacific Links Foundation runs 2 of them. One is on the Chinese border in Lao Cai province, and the other one is in An Giang province near the Cambodia border. So what the girls do is when they come into the shelter and they decide with their families, so they're not forced into anything, is that they agree to live with us, and we basically become their second homes. We send them to school, we teach them how to cook, feed them, clothe them, we have a house mother. We make sure that they have a safe environment. We also provide them art therapy. So they basically have a safe environment in which they can feel like they don't need to relive their trauma, that they can just focus on going to school and recovering and developing a future of their own. Typically the girls come in and stay with us on average between 2 to 3 years. And the reason why is because they're about 15 or 16 when they come into us. However, the age range differs. For example, in our shelter near the Cambodian border, our youngest trafficking survivor is 12. And she came to us when she was 11 because she had been trafficked to Cambodia when she was 8. So she'll stay with us for about 6 or 7 years. They all leave us when they graduate from something, whether it's high school, or vocational training school. And then after that, they go on to higher education. So currently we have one young woman who's finishing her last year of University of Social Work in Hanoi. We have 2 girls who just finished nursing school. We have 3 girls who are currently finishing or doing their internships to become preschool teachers. We have 8 girls who are in hospitality training school. And we have 1 girl who's in science and technology junior college. So what we try to do is not just encourage the girls to do the typical go sew or learn how to cook or whatever, but what we want them to do is have actual careers. I've been asked before by donors, who've seen us how we encourage the girls, and frankly, the girls encourage themselves. They say, "Oh, wow, you guys are kind of like tiger moms or tiger sisters," and in a way, in a good way, yes, because they don't have the luxury. What other options do they have? They don't have the luxury of sitting there and thinking, "Oh, the world is my oyster." So what we try to do is work with them on what is their dream, what is their goal in life. And if they say, "I want to be a doctor," and they have the ability to do so, like one young woman currently in our shelter right now who's finishing her senior year of high school, that's what we do. We support her, we help her get extra tutoring, and currently she's the top student in math and science in her class. And so that's what we try to do with the trafficking survivors. And so the support from UNAVSA and for this particular project, it's life-changing for the trafficking survivors. It's a difference between sending them back home for them to work in the field and get re-trafficked or forced into prostitution because they feel like they have no other options, versus graduating from university and becoming a social worker or becoming a nurse. So it's so vital, and we're so happy that UNAVSA has decided to support that. And our last part of the CPP project is a retreat for former reintegration survivors. We keep in touch with almost all of our reintegration survivors, and I think in the last 9 years we have encountered just over 800. Is we would love to bring as many of them together and see where they're at with their lives. Many of them are married. We've gone to their weddings. Many of them have children. We still all keep in touch, but it's a way to also encourage all the former shelter residents and the current shelter residents to keep going, keep trying, and in a way, this is our own, it gets better, right? The trauma they've experienced, the horrible experiences that they've had, it eventually becomes just one part of their life that they can leave behind and focus on their families and having a future instead. So, Alan, back to you.
Well, first off, Mimi, honestly, thank you very much for hopping on and just giving us a little bit of information about your organization. The work that Links does is very inspiring. So now that we've more or less finished kind of the contents, we would like to open up the floor for any sort of questions regarding human trafficking or Civic Links Foundation. We have Diane and Mimi, who are both very important figures, I guess, in the organization and who have a lot of background regarding these topics. So if you have any questions or anything that kind of, I guess, is kind of pressing on your mind, please do ask in the live chat. And then Mimi, Dan, hopefully you guys can kind of hop on and answer the questions. Do you see the questions on the YouTube live by any chance?
I do see the live chat. I don't see any questions. I see a lot of hello.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
If you have any questions, like right now would be super awesome. Regarding anything, anybody?
Mine's opening up. I have very slow internet here in Vietnam.
That's okay. Or perhaps you can ask them for any more sort of inspiring stories. I know it was a bit of a snippet of the inspiring stories that Mimi gave, but I'm sure both Mimi and Dan have great stories, and perhaps we can hear about that. Or awesome. If not, then we can conclude the call. So we'll just give it like a minute or two for questions. Perhaps people are kind of thinking of these questions before we do conclude. Mm. Or maybe, and would you like to share perhaps another inspiring story of like a success story, and then well, that will kind of maybe wait for questions.
Sure. So this I mentioned her briefly, but this is a story about a young woman, and actually, The Economist had written an article about the bride trafficking trade in our work. I think maybe 2 issues ago. It's the blue cover with the Facebook cover story on it. We're also on the cover story. So you can read more about that, about her in that particular article, but I'll give you some background on her. So this young woman is Hmong Vietnamese, and most of the victims that we work with on the Chinese-Vietnamese border are ethnic minority. So she had been trafficked, tricked and trafficked into China as a wife when she was I don't think she was yet 15 years old. And she was sold to this couple that wanted to buy her for their son. And so she ended up being sent to An Huy province, which is far from the Vietnamese border. There, she unfortunately was abused and raped by the son and then forced to marry him. And at age 16, she gave birth to a baby girl. Once she gave birth, the family then sold her to a factory near about 3 hours away that made winter coats. So not only was she trafficked for sex, but she was also trafficked for labor. So when that happened, she decided, okay, she's going to escape somehow. The mother-in-law kept the child, and the family took her wages every week. And so, but what she managed to do was just take a little bit of money before she had to hand over her wages to the family. There was also another young Vietnamese woman who was basically married off to the neighbor who also had given birth, and they were both about the same age, about 16 years old. So they were both in China for, I think in total of almost 3 years, to the point where both young women became completely fluent in Mandarin. But they never, ever, ever gave up their goal or their dream of escaping and coming back to Vietnam. So one day when the young woman decided they had enough money, she, and at that point she had gained enough trust from the family that they would leave her alone every now and then. One day she had literally a window of escape, meaning they left the window open, and she took all of her belongings, packed really quickly, jumped out the window, ran over, grabbed the neighbor girl, and then they ran and ran and ran until they got to the police station. Once they got to the police station, that was about 2 towns away, they then explained in Mandarin what their situation was, and then they were brought back to Lao Cai border crossing, and then after that they came into our shelter. So they've been living with us now for about 2 years, and they have had no contact with the families. They, left their children behind, have not had any contact. Although when I was up in the shelter in May, the young woman who planned the escape was quite upset because a message from one of her acquaintances in China had gotten to her saying that the husband, the quote-unquote husband, had remarried and gave away their daughter. So if you can imagine, at the age of 17, 18 years old, you've been tricked, you've been betrayed, you've been kidnapped, sold, raped, abused, gave birth, forced into forced labor and slavery, abandon your child, and escaped back to Vietnam. That's a lot to deal with in just a short life. But this young woman is so, so incredibly strong. When I first met her 2 years ago, I asked her, what's your dream? What do you want to do? And she said, oh, I want to be a doctor. And I said to her, okay, that's okay. We'll see. I mean, she's been out of school for 3 years. And I didn't know what her education history was before, because a lot of ethnic minorities would drop out of school early on. But I'm happy to say that, 2 years on, she is brilliant. She, in June, when I saw her again in June, she had just gotten her exam results back from 11th grade. and she was the top scorer in her class for physics, biology, and chemistry. And I just saw her again in September, and she, very excitedly told me that the Laogai City had extended her an invitation to compete in the city math tournament in January. And she's one of only a handful of students who's been invited to do the sort of like math Olympics. And we're so proud of her. And, she still has bouts of insecurities where she says, maybe I'm not smart enough to do this. So what we've done is, always tried to encourage her and also gotten her extra tutoring just to make sure that she gets the most support possible. She can do it. I think she can do it. And it will be such an amazing next chapter in her life if she can, go from trafficking victim and young mother to medical student in Vietnam, which is not an easy thing to do. Even if she wasn't a trafficking survivor, she's still female and she's still ethnic minority, which are two huge, X's against her in terms of finding success. So, this is the support from UNAVSA will go to support directly this young woman and then the other young women in the shelter.
Well, thank you, Mimi, for those, for the inspiring stories. So there are actually 2 questions on the YouTube Live. Do you actually see the questions? Can you read them?
No, because my screen is now frozen,
okay.
So I can't see anything.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure. I will copy and paste it.
Do you want me to read it? I see one of them. The one from Michelle is asking, is your organization doing anything to address larger policies dealing with human trafficking? So with that, we ourselves, we are not focusing on policies as an organization. Our focus is on providing services to like traffic survivors like Mimi had mentioned, as well as these prevention programs that we have in place. So working directly with these beneficiaries on the grounds in Vietnam and giving them the services that they need to either prevent them from being trafficked in the first place or working with survivors to make sure they get the assistance that they need so they can heal and begin their new life and a better future.
Yeah,
do you want
it's
to add
not
anything?
it's we have limited resources and we have to look at where we're most effective, but in a way, because we have to partner with local factor of living and working in Vietnam is that you have to partner with the local authorities, which in a way is good because we're able to work together with the local authorities and help adjust their views and the way that they deal with trafficking survivors and at-risk population. It's not like in the US where you can lobby and you can go to DC and march and everything. This is a different sphere and just different ways of doing things. And so what we try to do is we influence where we can through direct interaction, as Diane mentioned, with the survivors, with at-risk population, and with our local partners. Beyond that, we also work with the UK government. We work closely with the UK Home Office, which is sort of like their, I don't know what the equivalent is in security, and then through the UK government, they can then have direct diplomatic talks with the Vietnamese government on what they believe would be helpful in terms of policy. So we can work that way around as well.
So there are also 2 more questions. Mimi and Dan, would you like to take those 2 questions as the last questions? If you guys have more questions, feel free to post it on this YouTube video, so this video will be a YouTube video. Feel free to post it then, and then obviously Diane or Mimi can definitely answer the questions later, but we'll have time for these last 2 questions. Dan, do you want to take it away?
Can someone read the question off? Sorry.
Dan, you're on mute, actually.
Sorry, I'm like talking to myself. Most of my friends often use human trafficking and slavery as interchangeable terms. Can you elaborate on this, as sometimes this term can be broad?
So human trafficking is, they're 2 different things, but they often go hand in hand. Human trafficking is the action of buying and selling people, right? You can buy and sell, you can traffic people, and then they become slaves. And slavery also is a broad category. Do you have slave labor? Do you have sex slaves? Do you have, well, mainly those 2 main categories. So trafficking is the action transaction of turning someone into a slave.
I would also like to add that there's a lot of different definitions out there of what human trafficking is. And as our organization, we use a UN definition. So I'll be sending that on here so you guys can read it more comprehensively. But it involves like the harboring, transferring of somebody, and usually like deceit is involved and things like that. So I'll send you so you can read the whole definition of what we as an organization use and define as human trafficking. But a lot of different countries have their own definition as well and what they consider human trafficking.
So we have time for one more question. Diane, or maybe we should take one of those questions either by Chris or Michelle. So these questions will definitely be posted as, these live comments will be posted as questions on our YouTube video. So feel free to answer them later if you do want to answer them. But just these last few questions, Diane or Mimi, would you like to pick one of them?
Okay, so it looks like Michelle had asked a question. Besides raising awareness about human trafficking and fundraising money for the organization, what else can individuals do to help address and prevent the issue?
You guys can come and volunteer either in our California office or our Vietnamese office. I know that there's often study abroad, or you guys have like we've had students in the past come and do kind of like capstone projects where they stay with us for about 4 or 6 months and do a project, and it counts for class credit. We always love to have student volunteers, especially who understand Vietnamese culture and or speak Vietnamese. It's such an incredible experience because you're working directly with trafficking survivors, you're working directly with at-risk population, you're working with our Vietnamese team on the ground, and you will be able to see a whole another side of not just life in general, but what it means to be Vietnamese, I think. And in addition to seeing why human trafficking is such a big deal in Vietnam, how it's, if we leave it unchecked, hurt the country's development, how it hurts our future, how it hurts the young people. Your impact on preventing it from happening and supporting people who have been trafficked. We love having young people and volunteers come. So please, do you have any other suggestions? Diane?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we're also open to any suggestions that you guys might have of any, if you want to do like a group volunteer thing or different projects in terms of spreading awareness about the issue. We're always welcoming of that as well. And I'm the person you'll be working with if you're in terms of volunteering and things like that. So, and it could be individual basis or it can be group, and then we can kind of sort it out. We're small enough still that we will work with you to see where the best fit is, like in terms of what you're looking for and what your expertise is and what you want to work on. And I would say that anything counts and anything helps. So we need support all the way from like IT support to helping with our social media to putting our videos together. So I wouldn't say there's any skill that we don't need. So even if you feel like it may not be connected, just let me know and we'll figure out a way to see how we can make it work. Like we have, for example, a volunteer who is a black belt in martial arts. So she came to help with our summer camp and teach the girls. And this is one of our prevention programs. We have our summer camp and teach the girls on how to, be more confident and also self-defense. So there are things like that you may not think may not be directly related, but it can still help. So there's a lot of different things we can need other than working with our trafficking survivors, but also working with our at-risk population as well. So we do a lot of skill building and a lot of teaching people different knowledge and things like that. So we can use a lot of people's, the things that you're already interested in already doing. So it doesn't have to be something that is super, super complicated in terms of being able to volunteer. And I would say that pretty much anybody can volunteer.
And what we are thinking of doing, and this is something that the previous beneficiary, CPP beneficiary, because the UNAVSA had raised so much more money, create worship fund to send to UNAVSA students. Vietnam right now, supporting or getting involved in this issue, but you're sitting far away. There's nothing like coming to Vietnam, and like Diane said, no matter what it is, whatever skill you have, you can contribute. And it's just the interaction with the young people and with our team on the ground. And this is as grassroots as it gets. It just increases your awareness and knowledge level so much more for this issue. And hopefully will inspire you guys to come back to North America and keep, so.
Well, with that, I would like to thank both Mimi and Diane for hopping on for such an informative talk, and Sharon for answering our questions and giving us such good insight about the organization and what human trafficking is. And so I guess there are a few links actually in the bottom of the, in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's links for, I guess, for donation purposes, or about CPP or the Pacific Links Foundation. So feel free to click on that and check those out. As well, this live stream will be a YouTube video in a few days or so. So please do click on video, do watch it, because one of the initiatives that we're doing as UVSA Ontario is that for every 75 views we do get for the video, which including today's views, and also I guess the view of the video, we'll be releasing funny videos of a UVSA exec doing some sort of dare or challenge. These videos are very, very good. I highly recommend them. A bit biased because I was part of them, but they're really good videos. And yeah, so that concludes our webinar. Please check out the description page. Please share the video, watch the video, share it to your family, your mom, your dog, whatever. Be great. And then yeah, so thank you, Diane and Mimi, for hopping on and being such great inspirational people. So anyways, thank you everyone for tuning on, and good night.
Ontario.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.